Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Most of you already know me. My name is John Augustus McNair. My good friends call me J.A. Tonight, the Petalumans of yesteryear would like to tell you the story behind this wonderful Andrew Carnegie Library. Now, on your way in tonight, did you stand in front of this splendid building to take in the perfect symmetry and elegant proportions of this magnificent 1906 library? Let us look back at how the great civic building came into being with the help of our Petalumans of yesteryear. By 1858, the Petaluma population was approaching 1,500, and it was clear to everyone that the need for law and order, better schools, roads, public amenities had grown acute. On April 12th, the legislature granted a charter to incorporate our town of Petaluma. Later that year, the Independent Order of Oddfellows, Petaluma Lodge number 30, established a library for its members. The location was then in the Phoenix Building. By 1867, this informal book collection, their mission was to maintain a library, a reading room, collect scientific and literary works. It was made available to the public for $1 initiation and $4 per year. Books were reportedly filed by the merit systems, respectable ones within reach. Those considered otherwise by the librarian put on the highest shelf, preferably out of sight as well as reach. Dr. Crane was our first librarian. He was a physician from Ohio, and he was born in August of 1820, who came to Petaluma with his family in 1865. Although not a trained librarian, he was well educated and a prominent citizen, a Mason of high standing who served on the city's Board of Health as well as the Board of Directors for the Petaluma Savings Bank. In 1871, the library was moved into the newly constructed Oddfellows building until 1878, when the Oddfellows gave the library to our city. During 1877-78, Mr. Edward Lippitt, a prominent Petaluma attorney who was known for having the largest library in Northern California, was instrumental in the establishment of free libraries and reading rooms. Mr. Lippitt, would you please enlighten us?
Thank you. Yes, I am E.S. Lippitt, and I'm known for my large law library, also a member of the Oddfellows Library Association. I was responsible for the state legislation which opened the way for privately held libraries to transfer their collections to municipalities while still participating in their management. The first bill was intended to apply only to San Francisco. I suggested amendments to make the law applicable to all incorporated cities and towns. It passed March 18, 1878, and the bill provided that the proprietors or other competent authority of any library could donate and transfer its property to the incorporated city or town in which it was located for the purpose of establishing a public library and reading room. In consideration of such donation, the authorities of the library might, as their option, nominate and appoint as honorary trustees without salary a number equal to those appointed by the municipal authority. The honorary trustees were given authority to fill all vacancies that might occur in their number and were to have an equal vote in the management and to control of the library so donated and transferred. In 1878, the following passage of new legislation, the library was transferred from the Oddfellows to the city of Petaluma. Under the city, the library was supported by a direct tax varying from 4 cents to 10 cents on each $100 of assessed values of property in the city. Thank you.
During the next few years, the city housed the library in the Whitney building, above the Wickersham Bank and an upper floor of the Pullman building. In 1887, the library was moved to the third floor of the City Hall. It was 2 years later that we had our first librarian, Miss Jane Lackey. Perhaps Mrs. Addie Atwater of the Petaluma Ladies Improvement Club can further the history leading to the founding of a Carnegie Library right here in Petaluma. Mrs. Atwater.
Well, thank you, Mr. McNear. So nice to see you this evening. Hello. Well, I do want to take a few minutes to let you know of recent events that mightily influenced me and have really brought me to this point in the late 1800s. There was a big movement that started really with the Chicago World's Fair several years ago in 1893. Citizens and communities and states all across the country were truly inspired by the stunning Columbian exhibition. And in response, the city beautification movement and the women's clubs were born to support municipal improvements. I'm very pleased to report that women's club activities are progressing rapidly. The other influence for me has been my dear husband's deep involvement with the Odd Fellows Association for many years now, along with his commitment and ongoing support of our community's first publicly accessible library. Henry is a long-standing member of the Library Board of Trustees, along with Mr. Edward Lippitt, Mr. Isaac Wickersham, and others of note here in Petaluma. So you see, I became aware long ago of the importance and need for a permanent library in our community. Now, I am an civic-minded person concerned about the well-being and development of Petaluma. And I don't mean to boast, but I seem to be someone who gets things done. I, with some of my friends, recently formed the Petaluma Ladies Improvement Club. Mind you, the women of Petaluma do not need improvement. But the city of Petaluma most assuredly does. And I'm pleased to report that the Petaluma Ladies Improvement Club was the first club of its kind to emerge on the Pacific Coast. We formed initially here in Petaluma in response to an urgent need to improve and create parks in our community. But that was just the beginning. After a time, we at the club requested a meeting with the mayor to solicit funding and support for a permanent library. Oh my, I must be on my way. I don't want to keep the committee or the mayor waiting.
I'm Mayor Veale, William Veale. You ladies can say Mr. Veale. I thank you for coming today. Ladies, I'm quite surprised that your husbands have allowed you out this evening. I'm not accustomed to seeing ladies there in the council chambers. We of course expect your husbands to come forward to present such things of importance. What say you?
Your Honor, Mr. Veale, surely you understand the importance of this project for the betterment of all the citizens of Petaluma, men, women, and children, as a free resource through which knowledge will be gained and to provide a decent gathering place for reading and study.
And Mayor Veale, also, you know, I'm reminding you that our delegation of the Ladies Improvement Club, including Mrs. Daisy Reed, Mrs. Sarah Lippitt, Mrs. Jewell, Mrs. Meacham, and myself, are here with an important proposition this evening. It will mean a new permanent library for our community. No question that a new library will provide a respectable alternative to the saloons in town as a place to spend time in a productive way.
Mrs. Atwater and ladies, the trustees and I did deliberate this evening on such a matter. And I've got to tell you that this preposterous notion was turned down by all the members. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and while it may in the future be important to read, that I think her education will be better for homemaking and cooking and sewing.
Ladies, for the record, I want to tell you that I voted for this project. I felt that unless we did, we'd be talked to death forever. And I'm thirsty.
I can see by the time now we're going to adjourn to the new model saloon. Thank you, ladies.
Well, I have never in all my days heard such poppycock. I must say, I am disheartened by the mayor's response along with the council members. However, I see no reason why we should remain so. Not at all. We will carry on with our fundraising efforts with a permanent library as our goal. Make no mistake about that. We'll accomplish what we set out to do. Petaluma will have a new permanent library, and of that we can be certain. And so, in 1896, my friends and I at the Ladies Improvement Club made a request to Mr. Andrew Carnegie to approve a grant in the amount of $20,000 towards the construction of a new library in Petaluma. We waited and waited and waited several years until 1900 for a reply, but we did not receive any response from Mr. Carnegie. At that point, we had developed another strategy, and we once again met with the City Council, making a direct, very pointed, and successful request that a second application requesting $20,000 be submitted to the Carnegie Foundation. After waiting nearly a year, Mr. Carnegie offered $12,500 to Petaluma towards construction of a new library with conditions attached. Perhaps we need to get the story about that right from the source.
Hello, my name is Andrew Carnegie. Mrs. Atwater asked me to come here tonight to explain to you how the library funding worked from my perspective. By way of background, I was born in 1835 in a small town in Scotland. My parents were very interested in the Scottish Enlightenment, which was going on at that time, and my father became involved with the Chartist movement, which the goal of the Chartist movement was that the working class could take over the government from the landed gentry to their betterment. And you can imagine how the landed gentry felt about that. When that movement collapsed in 1848, I was 13 years old and my family had to leave Scotland. We moved to Allegheny, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pittsburgh. Throughout my youth, my family struggled to get by. As a young teenager in America, I worked in a cotton mill for $1.20 a week. I did have one very fortunate advantage, which I felt led to much of my later success, in that a man in town, Colonel Anderson, opened his library to local boys, and it allowed me to educate myself and gave me a lifelong love of books and learning. After the cotton mill, I got a job as a messenger with a telegraph company. I taught myself to use the telegraph and got good enough to get a job with the railroad. I worked really hard, and eventually, when I was just 18, I became the assistant to the superintendent. The superintendent told me about a stock sale that was going on and suggested that I could buy some. I was able to borrow $500 and invest it, and that was the start of my fortune. Over time, I made many more investments, and eventually I traveled to England. And while I was in England, I heard about a revolutionary method for making steel. There really wasn't a steel industry in the U.S. at that time, but there was a growing market for it because of the expanding railroads and the expanding cities. I brought the Bessemer process to America, and that was really the beginning of my fortune. In 1868, when I was 33, I wrote myself a memo. In it, I laid out a plan for the future. I decided that when I became 35, in just 2 years, that I would withdraw from business and I would live on $50,000 a year, which was a tidy sum in 1870, and give any increase in my wealth to help others. My motto has always been to try to help those who will help themselves. And in the business of philanthropy, which I really created, turned out to be very difficult work. You have to consider very carefully where to apply your money. I've always insisted that any project that I fund be only partially funded by me. I believe that a good project, the people involved have to be directly yes, the people involved have to be involved. At first, I gave money to build libraries in places that were significant to me, like my town in Pennsylvania and my birthplace in Scotland. It was in this period that Mrs. Atwater initially wrote to me. I don't know where she got the idea. I didn't have anything set up to handle a response like that. But by 1899, I had received so many requests that I decided, and many of them from women's groups, that I decided to set up a foundation to handle them all. The city of Petaluma submitted their request, and they were the 15th city in California to do so. I reviewed their circumstances. By then, we had developed what came to be known as the Carnegie formula. It consisted of, number 1, demonstrate a need for a public library. Number 2, provide a building site. Number 3, pay the staff to maintain the library. 4, draw on public funds to run the library. Do not use only private donations. 5, provide 10% of the cost of construction annually to support its operation. And number 6, and most important, provide a free service to all. I based the size of my fund on information about the population for each town. The citizens of Petaluma were able to put together their request, and I reviewed their criteria, and I'm happy to say that it is now one of 2,500 libraries I helped to build. In later years, we got a little more specific on what we were willing to fund. Some towns started to add a lot of embellishments, but my assistant James Bertrand and I felt that we wanted to fund libraries, not dance studios, eating facilities, or elaborate building exteriors. But Petaluma's beautiful design was fine with us. By the way, being a wealthy man, people often wonder just how wealthy I am. Well, I understand that far in the future there'll be people named Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. Well, my fortune is 2 or 3 times as large as either of them, and if you consider the relative size of our economies, I was far, far, far wealthier than they were.
Petaluma passed ordinance number 216 for a tax to raise $1,600 per year as requested, and asked that the Carnegie grant be raised to $16,000. That request was denied. Mrs. Atwater was not content, though, to give up on this effort.
No, I should say not. I was not content, not one little bit. And so, on November 17th, 1903, I wrote a letter and posted it myself directly to Mr. Andrew Carnegie. I didn't address it to his assistant. I didn't address it to his secretary. I addressed it to him. And this is what I wrote. Dear Sir, it is with some fear, yet not without hope, that I undertake this letter, but my heart is in it, and I do not anticipate failure in so worthy a cause. It is in relation to our public library, and to me individually, it is a tender subject. I will be brief in this appeal in its behalf. My husband, the late Henry Atwater, was one of the founders of our present library and a member of its board of trustees from its first day to his last. On this account, I feel a personal pride and interest and have given the city a finely situated lot of 100 by 160 square feet, for which I have been offered $8,000. This is to be used for library purposes only, and then only if a suitable building be erected. Our present library has over 10,000 volumes, well selected, and is rated about 6th in the state. We wish to build somewhat for the future. The plans submitted have been carefully examined, and the one selected as most suitable has been bid upon. And the lowest estimate for the same is over $15,000 for practically the walls and roof, and this by one of our local contractors who donated his time and profit on materials as an advertisement of his ability. At the present prices of labor and materials, a structure of brick or stone to hold over 10,000 volumes and be anything of an ornament to our city cannot be built for less than the above amount. We all want it to be a credit to you, as well as one of our beautiful buildings. Still, I do not desire all beauty and no substantiality. The Ladies Improvement Club, of which I have had the honor of being president ever since its organization some years ago, will lay out and beautify the grounds and keep them in becoming appearance until such a time as the city will assume the work. Our city is about to try to vote bonds for the building of some very much needed schoolhouses and for other necessities. And so you see, if we make the burden too heavy on our taxpayers, all will be defeated at the polls. I know for a certainty our census was a piece of gross carelessness, and we were not given our just and actual representation. I think this has all been told you, so will not dwell upon it, though it will bear emphatic repetition. Unknown to and solicited by anyone, I have alone resolved to make this last appeal to you in behalf of our city and my home, and ask you to raise your offer of a grant to $15,000. A widow's mite and your generosity can make the city the possessor of a structure worthy of you and a credit to your kindness for all the years to come. I'm willing to let my part sink in insignificance, but I do feel that this city, which will be my home for the remaining years of my life, is worthy of more. I have done more than was expected of me and without solicitation, and I trust you will not feel that I am taking any undue liberty in making this my personal appeal to you, dear sir. I do earnestly hope, yes, almost believe, you will hear my prayer and grant my request.
I think the Ladies Improvement Club is meeting to organize for fundraising.
Good afternoon, ladies. Addie. Congratulations must go out to each and every one of you on the success of the vaudeville entertainment given at the Hill Opera House Saturday night. Very well done. It was very well attended, and there was much appreciation for Mr. George Baker's ragtime performance, along with Harry Hastings' banjoist.
Oh, but the star of the evening was Mrs. Cyrus Young. She sang a solo. It was from Babes in Toyland. I can't sing that song, and you know, next part. Very well received. And the disappointment of the evening, though, was the absence of Professor Frank Carroll Giffen of Santa Rosa. He was unavoidably detained on account of gooseberry pie.
Oh, dear. I lost it as well.
That was terrible.
Well, thank you for the detailed report, Mrs. Meacham. And now I would like to report Mrs. McNear's Candy Committee sales results.
Oh, but may I just interrupt? I have to say, job well done to you and your committee and all of the members for the exceptionally choice candy sold in the evening. And those beautiful, lovely little souvenir bags, those were just, the boxes were just amazing.
Yes, I agree. And the total of the candy sales for the evening was $213.80, which I propose be used towards improvement of the Carnegie Library grounds. To my mind, an excellent idea and use. All in favor?
Yes, I am.
And so it is. Very well. And now, I am very pleased to announce Mrs. Lippitt, who has an idea.
Yes, well, ladies, as you know, Mr. Lippitt and I are known for entertaining notable and famous members of the community and the nation and the world in our home, our beautiful home, on the corner of 6th at D Street. Mr. Lippitt and I think we could have quite a fundraiser if we were to serve dinner in the drawing room and dining room of our beautiful home. You know, we have entertained the likes of Rutherford B. Hayes there, my husband's former law partner, and William T. Truman, Civil War general, and notable musicians, conductors, and singers from the Metropolitan Opera. And as a matter of fact, you know that we have a plaque outside our door that lists all of the senators and governors and notable people who have gone through our door. Therefore, we feel we could make quite a tidy sum with tickets to our dinner at our home, served under the light of our crystal chandelier. We would have only the finest foods prepared by our staff, and I would serve my favorite dessert, floating island with coconuts, served by our Chinese houseboy, Charlie. Now, if you like the idea, Mr. Lippitt and I will proceed.
Well, of course, thank you so much, Mrs. Lippitt. That's a wonderful idea. And I, for one, will look very much forward to that evening. Yes, thank you. And now, Mrs. Reed, if you would be so kind as to provide us with an account of the preparations for another fundraising event for library furnishings.
Yes, I'd be pleased to. This is from the Petaluma Daily Morning Courier. Daily Morning Courier. Saturday, December 1st, 1906. Continental dance planned. December 1st in the newly decorated dining room of the new Continental Hotel at 4th and English Streets. A dance will be given under the auspices of the Petaluma Ladies Improvement Club. Much interest is being centered in the approaching event, and as it will be given as a benefit to help beautify and furnish the new Carnegie Library. There will, no doubt, be a large turnout of local people. The ladies of the Improvement Club are always successful in their undertakings, and this will be no exception. The Grand March will begin at 9 o'clock sharp. Stevenson's orchestra will furnish music, and a delightful time is in store for all who attend.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, soon after word of the grant from Mr. Carnegie was received, I sold my property at the corner of B and 4th Street, which my dear Henry had deeded to me in 1890, to the city for half its market value, $2,500. This amount was paid to me in gold coin. I also included a stipulation in the deed, and this was as follows. The new library would always be used as such, and if it ceased to be, the deed would be rescinded. The building and its contents would be given to my heirs or descendants. And something tells me that this building will always be used as a library, if only a portion, for use as a reference library. I like to think that will be to honor the condition of the agreement I made with the trustees in the original deed.
In 1903, there was a statewide competition for an architect to design the library building. Both this building and the Lincoln Primary School behind it were designed by Brainerd Jones. Great honor fell upon our city, reported the Argus, when the library trustees, after examining the plans submitted by the leading architects of California, accepted those of a Petaluma boy, a young man in years, but old in wisdom and taste, who will be among the great local architects of his day. Well, well. And here's Mr. Jones now. Let's hear what he has to say about this exciting project.
Hello, my name is Mr. Jones, Brainerd Jones. I was the architect chosen by the selection committee for the new Petaluma Library, funded partially by the Carnegie Foundation. I started my own practice here in 1900, 4 years prior to the installation of the cornerstone for the library. I have always been involved I have been involved with other buildings in town, such as the addition to the Line and Twine building on Lakefield Street, and numerous houses here in Petaluma, and the Carnegie-sponsored public library in Healdsburg, which still exists today. For the Petaluma Public Library project, there was no architectural restrictions dictating the design other than it needed to meet budget and be effective in its use as a library. I chose to use the classical design elements popularized by the Beaux-Arts School in France and the architectural concepts exhibited in the Chicago Exposition in the 1890s. Both these sources use classical elements of Greek and Roman architecture in a modern interpretation that gave a very substantial presence in the look of the building and the visual sense that the building was both classical and substantial. Features in the building representing the classical approach to architecture include the use of Corinthian columns at the front portico, which also has a triangular shaped feature at the top known as a pediment. These features and the use of stone and brick veneer for the outside of the structure are reminiscent of temples and government buildings of the Greek and Roman periods of history. Other elements of the building reflect the influence of 16th century Venetian architect Andrea Palladio, whose architecture drew also on classical references, but emphasized the importance of symmetry, balance, and proportion when putting together the elements of a building. Signature elements of this style involve the use of arched windows, circular windows, and domes as architectural features. The library incorporates all three of these features with the symmetrical use of the arched windows over a bank of 3 windows on each side of the front portico, the placement of round windows over the entry door, and the centrally located dome that provides a ceiling focal point and provides natural but filtered light to the center of the building. The rather formal character of the building is consistent with that found on other government-sponsored structures constructed both before and after this library. The United States Capitol Building, the Jefferson Memorial, the California State Capitol, and San Francisco City Hall all represented classical architectural features from the past that speak to the strength and longevity that is intended for these buildings. Unlike many classical buildings, the exterior stone and brick work are not the structure holding up the roof, which was originally covered in slate and is now covered with composition shingle. A wood structure hidden by the masonry on the outside and the plaster walls on the inside that also have wooden wainscoting acts as the structural frame of the building. This wooden structure probably is what gave the building sufficient flexibility to withstand the great earthquake of April 1906 that struck Petaluma as well as Santa Rosa and San Francisco. Though some repairs were necessary to the building before it could be inhabited, it did not suffer the destructive fate that buildings in those other 2 locations endured during that earthquake. It is important to note that in order to support the community that helped pay for the building and allowed for its establishment, and to keep costs as low as possible, every opportunity was made to use local materials and artisans for its construction. The stonework came from the Stony Point Quarry and was installed by local stonemason Edward W. Mervyn Evans. The stones were transported using the Petaluma and Santa Rosa Interurban Railway, which also owned the quarry. The buff-colored bricks were manufactured nearby in Alameda. The lumber used for the structure and interior finishes was Douglas fir and Oregon pine, which grows abundantly in forests just north of Petaluma. The general construction was managed by local contractor Richard R. Mullen. The foundation work was carried out by local concrete specialist J.R. Nesbitt. The two subcontractors provided an international connection to the project, as both Mr. Evans and Mr. Nesbitt were born in Ireland. Finally, it is important to note the interior of the library. Libraries are supposed to be a place of quiet tranquility, where a person can enjoy the peaceful study of books and periodicals. This is accomplished through the use of numerous windows and a central dome that provide light for reading. The use of the upper floor arcade surrounding the perimeter of the building provides additional bookshelf space while visually connecting the upper floor to the lower floor, and also gives the librarian with the opportunity to observe goings-on throughout the building, even if he or she is busy checking out books at the front desk. I hope you appreciate the opportunity to enjoy this beautiful space designed to encourage learning and the expansion of knowledge.
On June 10th, 1904, a massive granite cornerstone measuring 4 feet in length was donated and laid by local stonemason E.W.M. Evans. There was a huge parade. Buildings were draped. The masons from around the state came for the dedication ceremony and the celebration. The principal ceremony was that of the Masonic fraternity, with the highest state officers officiating. Local Masons, Knights Templar, and those of other cities, and nearly every fraternal civic organization in the city participated. A morning reception at Masonic Hall, which was beautifully decorated. Lunch at noon with all the Mason bodies assisting. A special train from Santa Rosa arrived at 12:30 and brought down a big crowd of fraternal orders, including ladies and citizens in general. The command to march was given at 1:30, and the parade began on Washington Street to Main, down to E, up to 4th, and back to the library building. On arriving at the library, the program began. Band music, prayer by the Grand Chaplain, history of the library by Honorable F.A. Cromwell, a brief address by Mayor Veale, presentation of travel by Grand Master by Mr. E.S. Lippitt, furnished by the Board of Library Trustees and made by Shreve of San Francisco. It was sterling silver with a mahogany handle and was an exquisite piece of workmanship. There was a response by Grand Master and laying of the cornerstone in accordance with ritual. More music, oration by the Grand Orator, music, and finally a benediction by the Grand Chaplain. The addresses were all eloquent and listened to with rapt attention. After this ceremony, the time was given over to the entertainment at Masonic Hall. And throughout the city, in the evening, Petaluma Lodge, number 180 F and AM, conferred degrees and a banquet followed. The Santa Rosa Special left here at midnight, and not until then did the festivities cease. Among the crowd was notable Petaluman, Mr. William Howard Pepper. Oh, and here he is right now.
Good evening, ladies. I'd like to say a few words about how I became interested and involved in your endeavor to bring a library to Petaluma for all of its citizens to enjoy. But first, a little background. In 1889, my wife Phoebe and I traveled to Europe. And while visiting Germany, I became enthralled with a school for educating very young children. They called it kindergarten. I was so captivated by this school that I decided to establish a similar school for the children of Petaluma. And when we returned from our trip, I set about seeking donations and fundraising, and in 1893, 1893, we opened Pepper-Free Kindergarten, the first public kindergarten in Petaluma. When I heard of the efforts of the Ladies Improvement Club to establish a first-class library for Petaluma, I knew I had to help in your cause in any way I could. You know, I thought of those kindergartners as they grew up and the need to have a library at their disposal for study and research, thereby enhancing their education. I also thought of the value of having mothers and fathers providing role models for their children by taking them to the library for study and discovering the joy of finding good literature to read and enjoy. The library would also serve as a venue for cultural events, author visits, and lectures, and all sorts of cultural activities for the children and adults in Petaluma. And so, when I learned Mrs. Atwater had secured the grant from the Carnegie Foundation to provide the library building, and she and the Ladies Improvement Club worked tirelessly to raise additional monies through their fundraising efforts to augment the grant, I knew that I had to get on board. And I have to say, those fundraising events were just plain fun. The delightful vaudeville show and the ice cream socials were a big hit. The dinner, hosted by the Lippitts, was superb. The candy booth, featuring Ida Bell McNear's fudge, was fabulous. The fortune teller's booth was very popular. As I hear tell, the fortune teller always told good fortunes. And thanks to our local merchants, the grab bags, for which they donated so much merchandise, raised huge funds. And so, ladies, I would like to thank you and commend you for persisting in your good work in making the establishment of a free library a reality for all Petalumans.
On February 17th, 1906, there was a pre-year opening for the new library with hundreds of townspeople. The building was ready for use except for furnishings and fixtures. When the great earthquake of 1906 struck the northern coast of California at 5:12 a.m. on April 18th, the library was not yet in order. But afterwards, the building's opening was delayed pending work on the dome and a few minor repairs. In May, with the aid of high school faculty and some students, books were moved from City Hall 2 doors north to the basement of the new library where they had limited hours. City Hall had sustained great damage in the quake and the books were no longer safe there. It was November 13th when the official opening of the new library occurred. Miss Sarah Cassidy was hired as librarian, and I think she is here tonight and would like to share her story.
I'm Sarah Cassidy. I joined the board of the Petaluman's Ladies Improvement Club in 1897, first as secretary and later as treasurer. Over the years, I served on a number of committees, such as the Walnut Park Committee, the Auditing Committee, and the Entertainment Committee. I was active in the club until the late teens when we disbanded, having accomplished our primary objectives. In 1898, I was appointed city librarian following the retirement of Mrs. Lackey. My father, Samuel Cassidy, who in his early years worked as a journalist and later owned and edited the Petaluma Argus, died in 1904. I'm told that copies of his diaries are still in existence today and are under the care of the museum's curator, Salon Russick. Can be found upstairs. My father's book, An Illustrated History of Sonoma County, was published in 1889. Is found in many libraries, including the one here, and also available digitally. I'm not quite sure what that means. The Internet Archive. Sadly, Lewis Publishing Company failed to credit my father as the author, and this was one of the biggest disappointments of his life. When the doors of the new Carnegie Library opened, I was there to greet the public. At the time, we had just over 10,000 books. The library staff at the time included myself and a janitor. The tables, desks, and chairs were all solid oak, which I think you've probably heard through earlier, were paid for with fundraising efforts by my colleagues in the Ladies Improvement Club. In June of 1907, it was reported that those visiting the library numbered in an excess of 2,000 people a month. 1907. Working with the Ladies Improvement Club, I helped to raise funds to pay for the site work and landscaping at the Petaluma Library, while local nurseryman, and also councilman for a period, W.A.T. Stratton, donated 6 ornamental trees to be planted on the grounds. My memory's a little hazy. As you know, I was born in 1865. But I suspect those trees included the giant sequoia, cedar, palm, and bunya bunyan that are still on the property. And I think there was some sort of celebration I read about one of the trees as a heritage tree just recently. Maybe that was the California live oak. That's this beautiful tree in the backyard that is much older than this building. The bunya bunya in front was probably planted about the same time as the building itself. In 1908, the California Library Association appointed me president of the 3rd District, which included Sonoma, Marin, Mendocino, Napa, Lake, and Solano counties. That was quite an honor. That association, which was established in 1895, is still in existence in 2018 and has a membership of nearly 3,000 total. In 1910, when the Cotati Ladies Improvement Club were working to establish their own library, I, Sarah Cassidy, facilitated the donation of books from the Petaluma Library. I guess they got our discards. By 1911, I had an assistant, Mrs. Lily Allen. That was the same year that I came face to face with a lunatic and had to call the police. But I don't think it was on, I'm not sure how I did that, because we didn't have things like this. Maybe I just shouted out the front door. If I recall, it was March of 1911 when a man who had been sleeping on the lawn in the front of the library jumped to his feet and ran into the building. He was shouting about religion and began smashing bookcases and tossing books on the ground. It was really scary, as I was the only one in the building at the time. It took 2 men to remove him from the building. The man's name was Stanley Moyer, and I was told he had come to California from Canada for his health. It's kind of the opposite nowadays, isn't it? And was staying with his brother at the Continental Hotel, which I think we heard about earlier was the site of some of our festivities. So the good old days weren't always free of violence, as we sometimes might think. When my mother, Cynthia Frances Denman Cassidy, sister of Ezekiel Denman, died in 1921, the family house on 6th Street, which I had lived for nearly my entire life, was sold. And I bought my own house at 108 5th Street. So let's see, I was born in the 1860s, 1920. It took me that long to move out of the family home. In 1930, I resigned my position as head librarian. I was 65, my health was poor, and at that point, the very capable Luann Leach, a UC Berkeley graduate, was appointed to replace me. I am honored to have been the first librarian to serve in this grand building, which now houses the museum. and proud to have been part of the establishment through my affiliation with the Ladies Improvement Club to have made that come a reality. Thank you.
The Petaluma Carnegie Library was one of over 2,500 library buildings constructed in towns and neighborhoods with the aid of his funding. Carnegie's philanthropy addressed the needs of municipal libraries for buildings of their own. Many libraries reflected the expression of community pride in public buildings, stimulated by the Chicago 1894 Columbian Exposition. Ultimately, 5 Carnegie libraries were built right here in Sonoma County and 144 in California. Today, your 1978 converted historical library and museum and the Petalumans of yesteryear encourage you to stop by and visit this magnificent structure often and to share its history with others. Please see the current listing of programs available to the public. We would like to thank you for taking time this evening to visit with us and hear how this wonderful building came into being. We'd also like to shout out to our Director of Lighting, Mr. Clint Gilbert. And now, I would like to present to you the Petalumans of yesteryear, starting from my far left. Please give us your character name and your real name.
My character name is Sarah Cassidy. My real name is Catherine Reinhardt, and I'm fortunate enough to continue in the library field and work.
My usual name is Captain Thomas Foster Veale. Here tonight I am the misogynistic board member Kozanowski. My real name is Homer Johnstone.
My character name, or alias as I like to call it, is Brainerd Jones, and my official portrait's over here on the wall, next to the door. My real name is Brent Russell, and the two of us share something in common. We're both architects.
My name for this presentation is William Francis Rowe Veale. I was the then mayor, turn of the century. My Petaluman name is Isaac Garrettson Wickersham, and my modern name is Marshall West.
I'm Andrew Carnegie tonight. Normally I'm Lyman Bice, but I get mail delivered to Leaf Orderman.
I am tonight William Howard Pepper. I also portray airmail aviator Fred Wiseman, and my real name is Michael Close.
Tonight, I'm Daisy Reed. Generally, as a Petaluman of yesteryear, I'm Clara Williams McNear, and otherwise I go by the name of Susan Coolidge. And I just want to take a moment to let you know that our Ida Bell Denman McNear, Barbara Harden, is ill and couldn't come tonight, but this group means a tremendous amount to her, and I just wanted to have her name mentioned.
And so my Petaluman of yesteryear persona is Addie Daly Atwater, but I also get mail delivered to Sherry Wordegren.
And my name tonight was Miss Jewel. My usual Petalumans of yesteryear name is Clarabelle Sprawl Jewel Ivankovich. And my modern name is Alice Witt.
I'm Melissa Jane Stewart Meacham, and my daily name is Binky Thorson.
And I am Mrs. Sarah Lewis Lippitt. My current name is Linda Buffo.
I am S.S. Lippitt, and my regular name would be Steve Buffo.
Tonight my name is John Augustus McNear, but tomorrow morning I'll be Jerry Posen.